Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here with another Master Duel video for you. So today I've got a pretty interesting one, I think. So I wanted to go over the staples again because obviously with the inclusion of some new cards and with the meta shifting, we're seeing new cards start to see more play, and obviously newer cards being included. Some like good old Destroyer, Phoenix, Enforcer here being included in a large swath of decks. So I think it's definitely time to update the staple guide, not only for new inclusions, but also the positions of some staples have kind of like shifted around. You might be wondering, well, what do you mean by positions? And I don't know that this is something I ever explicitly disclosed on my previous staple guide videos, but the way I determine what cards actually go into these staple guides is through MasterDuelMeta.com, and some of you might not be aware that Master Duel Meta has this feature, so I want to go ahead and show this off real quick. See here on MasterDuelMeta.com, just on the main site, if you go up to this little search thing, this little magnifying glass right here, and click, and just don't even do anything, you just click on it, it'll allow you to search for cards, but the default filter is actually by popularity, which I think is really cool, because basically what this does, from what I understand, is this is grabbing from like every list that's on Master Duel Meta what the most popular cards being used are among all decks right now. So well, I kind of spoiled in a way what some of the content of the video is going to be about here, but I thought it might be fun for this video to, let me go ahead and get my setup back here, there we go, to not only just show off staples and talk about them in general, but let's talk about like what are the top 50 most used cards in Master Duel. And yeah, I just wanted to show the metric by which I'm determining what the most 50 used cards are. I'm going by popularity on Master Duel Meta, but I'm not just grabbing the first 50 cards and saying these are the most 50 popular cards in Master Duel Meta, because that's not really helpful, because a lot of them that are on there are actually, archetype based, and I wanted to provide a list that was a little bit more useful. So I included, I omitted all cards that are used like exclusively in like their own archetypes decks. And we're gonna only be focusing on cards that see play across multiple archetypes, multiple different decks, and we'll break them down from 50 to 1. I'm not gonna spend too long on each individual card. I'll just, say the number, say the card, talk a little bit about the cards, what decks use the card, and what its role in those decks tends to be. So, let me go ahead and grab the old list here. Let me see where we're starting. Okay, so number 50 it's gonna be Lord of the Heavenly Prison. This is a new recent addition to the card pool as of the latest, not the latest secret pack, technically, Refined Blade. I keep forgetting that Exo Sister pack even came out, to be totally honest. But I could just be bashing on that deck too hard. Anyway, though, we're here to talk about Lord of the Heavenly Prison. This card is primarily seeing use in Eldritch, but I included it here because you can really play it in just about any deck that plays a lot of back row, which does tend to be more like stun-based decks, but could also maybe be something like Altergeist, or I've seen it in like True Draco as well. Just any deck that's playing a lot of face down cards, you typically want to play Lord of the Heavenly Prison. Very powerful card, not only protecting your back rows from being active, but also being able to summon itself as just a nice 3k body on the board as well. So let's see here. Next card we've got, number 49, is going to be Dino Wrestler Prankratops. This is actually a very good generic card to use, particularly for going second decks, because in order to summon it, your opponent has to control more monsters than you do. It's a nice way to just pop any card on the field. You can just special it, tribute itself, and then destroy any card on the field. You do have to note that it is targeted and is destructions. There's a lot of things that Prankratops can't get rid of, but even then, it's also sometimes good to just summon this as a 2600 body. Again, this card tends to be better in like going second decks, or like maybe more control-y based decks. Like Sky Striker can make good use of it. Eldritch Kaiju, or not Eldritch, Kaiju, Danger Kaiju, that's what I was trying to think of. Danger Kaiju can make decent use of it. I think can sometimes play this card. Numeron can play this card. Yeah, again, just more, typically I see it more in going second decks. So, alright, number 48 here is going to be Vanity's Emptiness. Vanity's Emptiness is a card that most of us are probably familiar with. We've had it flipped on us once or twice, and it stopped us from managing to make really any significant plays whatsoever. So Yeah, this card is not just useful in some decks, though. We're starting to see this card being played a little bit more in some meta decks, like Sword Soul Tenyi, because really that deck can just set up their Chi Shao plus Baron, and then flip up the Vandy's Emptiness, and now they've got multiple negates, and you can't special summon, which makes their board that much harder to get over. Even just Baron by itself plus Vandy's Emptiness can sometimes be enough to just completely stonewall you out of being able to do anything in the game. So Emptiness, yeah, like I said, not just good for some decks, can also be used in some like more combo based decks as well. Not all of them, but some. All right, number, oh my god, what are we on? This is 47, right? 47 is going to be 1-for-1. 1-for-1 is a nice extender for decks that have combos that rely on level 1 monsters. Leerlisk Bird Up is a deck we've seen that in, where you can discard a monster and then special summon it, the bird from your hand. I'm trying to think of other decks off the top of my head. Any deck that really uses Jet Synchron could make use of this card. Synchron decks in general like 1-for-1. Again, just any combo deck that has a level 1 monster. DDDs, I think, because can't they start with one of the level 1 monsters? I think they might use 1-for-1. But in general, you do want to be mindful when activating 1-for-1 of getting ashed, because it really hurts to have it get ashed when you're losing 2 cards, not only the 1-for-1, but also the monster you're discarding. So do be mindful of that. All right, number 46 here, we have Pot of Extravagance. So this is one of the many pot cards that tends to see a lot of play. Pot of cards, I should say. You know what I mean. Pot of Extravagance among them is the one that tends to see play more in decks where the extra deck is not as important to the deck's core strategy. Because obviously with Pot of Extravagance, you got to throw out, it's 3 or 6, but typically you banish 6 cards from your extra deck to draw 2, because banishing 3 to draw 1 is really not worth it. So again, this is going to be a card that sees generally more played, more stun type decks, or just any in general deck that doesn't need its extra deck at all, that can afford to just banish 6. It's going to be like Eldritch, like True Draco. Altergeist, another one, although Altergeist does use its extra deck a little bit more. Still typically at Extravagances for 6 a decent amount of the time. So okay, let's see. Let me go ahead and scroll up on the old list here. Let's see, that was 46, right? Oh my god, I'm gonna lose track of this number at some point. I know I am, because I didn't actually number this list like a dummy. So Gamma Seal is gonna be number 45, I believe we're on. Gamma Seal, the Sea Turtle Kaiju. Yep, among the Kaijus, this tends to be the most frequently used one, because it's got the lowest attack of them and therefore is the easiest to run over. That's pretty much as simple as that. You could use other Kaijus, if you wanted to craft one with a rare or normal Kaijus. It doesn't have to always be Gamma Seal per se, but just, again, Gamma Seal sees the most play because it has the lowest attack. Kaijus don't really typically see play in any one particular deck. They're a pretty widespread tech choice. You could feasibly play a Kaiju in just about any deck, but it does tend to not be great in more combo-based decks, especially ones that are tight on board space for their combos, or main deck space, again, for fodder for their combos. So you do still have to be mindful of what deck you're putting the Kaijus in, but overall, I think this is the first card that we've come across on the list that is a little bit more on the generic side. So, you know what? Actually, I have an idea to keep track of this number. Let me pull out my... I should have just numbered the list is what I should have done, but here. Alright, we can use that to keep track. So 44 is what we're on. Number 44, that is going to be Torrential Tribute. So this is actually a pretty good steeple spell if you're more of a budget player, because Torrential Tribute is only a rare, but it's actually still a really, really good disruption tool. Destroying all monsters on the field when any monster is summoned. So this tends to be played in, like, Eldritch plays it. I mean, this is a card that, like, a lot of decks could get away with playing, but a lot of decks just don't, because there are just better disruption tools out there. But again, if you're a more budget player, again, Torrential Tribute, very, very good disruption tool. Decks that commit less monsters tend to be able to use this a little bit more freely, but that said, it's definitely still not bad just in general. Again, if you're looking for more budget options there. So alright, next up we have number 43 is going to be Artifact Scythe. And one thing I should have mentioned towards the beginning of the video is that, again, I'm not just ripping the top 50 cards, because I did just the top 50 cards, even if I was only including generic cards, or like cards that are generically used, I'd be including multiple cards from the engine. So for number 43, I'll say Artifact Scythe / also Dogda, the Link 2 monster, because they're right next to each other on the list. But Artifact Scythe in general is seeing more play, because With DPE out, it's a little bit easier to pop this card and trigger its effect. This card can be set face down in the spell trap zone, either from your hand, or you can use Artifact Dagda, the Link 2 monster, to set it directly from your deck, and then you can use your DPE to just go ahead and pop the Scythe, and that's going to prevent your opponent from summoning any extra deck monsters for pretty much the entirety, or not pretty much, for the entirety of their turn. Also, it summons itself to the field, which can occasionally be nice. It's like a body or a material to use, or just to battle with in general. So that's why Scythe has been seeing an increase in play, even though it was in the game before DPE came out. It wasn't really used nearly as often. But as far as decks that can make use of Artifact Scythe, Phantom Knights is the bigger one, but Code Talkers can potentially, set up Scythe plus DPE. And there's another deck I'm not remembering off the top of my head that I know can also set up Scythe plus DPE relatively easily. If I remember it, I'll come back to it. But Phantom Knights and Code Talkers tend to be, from what I've seen, the bigger of the ones that consistently set up Scythe plus DPE. So, okay, next up we have number 42 is going to be Solemn Strike. So Solemn Strike is a counter trap that can hit any special summon or monster effect for only 1,500 life points, which is not that high of a cost. So if you have this card, it can be used in, a decent number of decks, but it tends to be better in more control-based decks, like Eldritch and like Altergeist and like True King. Kind of a recurring theme for some of the lower cards in this top 50 list, as stun decks tend to largely share the same pool of responses. So Solemn Strike in particular, again, you can use it generically, but like I said, it tends to just be better in control decks. Unlike Solemn Judgment, you do have to be a little bit careful about the life point payments because it is a fixed cost and not just half. There are times where you will just not be able to use Solemn Strike because you're that low, but if you're playing control deck and you're that low, you're probably not in a good spot anyway, where you're going to be using Solemn Strike as the card that's going to make or break the game for you. So again, if you're playing more stun-based decks, then this is the card for you. Or this is a card for you, one of the cards for you, I should say. Alright, number 41 is going to be Super Polymerization. This card is used in a lot of decks that fusion summon almost, I don't want to say all of them, but just about all of them. But like your IDS, your Invoke Dogmatica Shaddoll, your Despia decks, they're all making good use. I think some hero decks even still are making use of Super Poly, because a lot of fusion monsters that are worth going into nowadays have fairly generic requirements. So being able to Super Poly and just fuse away your monster and your opponent's monster, or sometimes even in an awesome world, two of your opponent's monsters. You could use like Star Venomy Dragon as a fusion monster that the only materials are 2 darks on the field. So that's pretty easy to fuse 2 of your opponent's dark monsters into that. Yeah, it's really nice to be able to do that. And especially the thing that's especially nice is that, this card cannot be responded to at all. So can't be negated, can't be ashed, can't get max seed in response to it. It's just a very, very nice tool that most fusion decks should be able to take advantage of. Alright, next card. Oh, I should also note that Raigeki, Monster Reborn, and Rhoda, since everybody already has those cards, I'm skipping over those as well, because I figure a lot of people might be using this list to figure out what cards they need to craft. I didn't think it'd be very helpful to include cards that everybody gets for free. So Raigeki technically would be next on this list, but everybody's got it. And again, that same is going to go for Rhoda and Monster Reborn, which again would appear on this list, but I didn't include them because everybody's already got them. So the next card for our purposes, number 40, is going to be Ghost Spell and Haunted Mansion. So this card has been seeing an increase in play ever since the recent set came out, because again, it's a really good card to hit DPE. But in addition to that, Ghost Spell and Haunted Mansion hits a lot of stuff in general anyway. It's pretty much just Ash for graveyard-based effects, and while there are definitely more deck-based effects that get used and drawing effects that get used, as opposed to like graveyard-based effects, the Ghost Spell is still very, very, very useful for hitting a large swath of decks. If you're playing a deck that's got a lot of hand traps like Sky Striker or Numeron or even like Trizu to some extent, if you're playing a deck that can fit in a lot of flexible disruption options, I would definitely recommend giving a Ghost Spell a try. Very, very good. Like I said, hits a lot of stuff, namely DPE nowadays. Alright, number 39 is going to be Emergency Teleport, which is actually not a card I would have expected to make this list. And you might think, well, level 3 or lower is Psychic, isn't that like generic, or not, isn't that specific to whatever deck plays it? But no, actually, because there are quite a few different decks that use Emergency Teleport as an extender. The main one is Virtual World, but Phantom Knights also uses Emergency Teleport as an extender. And beyond that, there's also any deck that's using like the Punk engine can use E-Tele as an extender, as I believe the level 3 monster that the Punk engine tends to use is Psychic. So that's another, and that's a fairly generic engine. Relatively, it's not like very widely spread used, but can be used in a lot of decks. Like Rose 10 Yi is another deck where you would expect to see that, and then in turn Emergency Teleport as well. So yeah, this card might seem really generic, but there are a lot of good level 3 or lower Psychics that can be used for extenders in again a pretty large variety of decks. So yeah, definitely be mindful of that when you're building your next combo based deck. Maybe you can make use of E-Tele. Okay, number 38 is going to be everyone's favorite Imperial Order. I've seen a lot of people say that this card should get banned, and I don't necessarily disagree with people. It is a pretty oppressive card. As far as like floodgates go, this is one of the more, because it hits all spell cards, and it's not like, you know, spells are a niche thing. There's a very, very large swath of decks out there that are fairly reliant on their spell cards. So, you know, you do have to be mindful of paying the life points. And make sure you don't lose that way, because it is not easy, but if you're not mindful, it is easy for that to happen. So, but otherwise, just against the right deck, this is just flip this card up and you automatically win the game. Which, I mean, you could say that about any floodgate, but I don't know. Again, this one in particular, spells being extremely common, and also not only that, but spells typically being the outs to floodgates with something like Lightning Storm or Harpy's Feather Duster, also makes the Imperial Order extra pesky to get rid of, or yeah, extra difficult to get rid of. So. Yeah, this card might get banned. Who knows? It's banned, I think, in both the TCG and OCG, but with Master Duel, who really knows what's going on with our ban list? So we'll just have to see in the future. All right, number 37 is going to be the Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. This is a really, really good removal option for pretty much, like, it's hard to say specifically. Kind of like any deck where you can make 3 monsters, which sounds really generic, but it kind of is and isn't at the same time, because you also have to have the extra deck space for Underworld of the Goddess of the Closed World. But in the right deck, this is basically just an extra deck kaiju, because you can use 3 of your effect monsters and then 1 of your opponent's effect monsters to link them away to make this card. Because it's being used as a link material, your opponent doesn't really have a chance to respond at all. And its effects are actually, you know, still not that bad either, you know, negating all of your opponent's face-up monsters when it's link summoned. You know, it's unaffected by effects unless they target, and then if your opponent activates a card or special summons a monster from the graveyard, you can negate that. So not only is it like a kaiju, but it's also got a lot of like relatively niche but still relevant effects attached to it. So as far as decks that you can use Underworld Goddess of the Closed World, like, I don't know, Bird Up could probably use it. It's really, again, just really reliant on the deck's extra deck space. And obviously, it's still got to be a deck that can consistently put out 3+ effect monsters in a turn, but that's not too hard to do. It's kind of like almost a generic extra deck. I don't want to call it a staple, because it's not like, it doesn't really ever need to be in your 15. It's just a card that if you have room within your 15 can be good to include. So there's that there. All right, number 36 is going to be Elder Entity the Tis, which this actually really surprised me to see this as number 37, because I don't really see, or number 36 rather, because I don't really see this card that often at all. But actually, I thought about it more, and the reason I think it's up here much higher than I expected it to be is because there are multiple ways of summoning it, and then both those ways, because they're individually used less frequently than the Tis, tend to end up lower on the list there. So the 2 ways that it's commonly summoned are, one that actually I was kind of surprised didn't make this list, is Instant Fusion. I think is a pretty common way to summon Natis, but also Super Poly, because, you know, I was talking about Super Poly, like, it's if a fusion monster has generic targets, it's really easy to use Super Poly. Well, this is a Synchro plus an Xyz monster, so or actually I can use summon it with Super Poly. I'm seeing you do not use polymerization, but I actually don't know if you can or not. I should know that, but I've never really used a deck, as you can see, with an Atis or Super Poly in it. But, you know, regardless, it's still just a good material to use. I think it's more often than not summoned with Instant Fusion. I know IDS can use it. Also, the other way that it's used, that's right, is effects that send from the extra deck to the graveyard. Oh, shoot, I just had it in my head. What was that effect? I think it's even in IDS. I just can't remember. Oh, it's the There's the Dogmatica trap that sends a card from extra deck to graveyard to destroy a card. You can blow up multiple cards if you send an Natis. That's probably another reason why it's so high up. So Natis is one of those cards that's kind of niche, but it's got multiple niche uses. So, you know, it's kind of a card you can make for a few different specific decks. You just probably have to do more research. It's something that, it's not a card you wouldn't want to like look into making Natis. It's more like, oh, does the deck I am using happen to make Natis? Okay, then I can use it in a couple of other decks as well. Is more how this card is used. So alright, let's see what we've got next here. Is actually going to be number 35, which is Selene, Queen of the Master Magicians. This card is used not only obviously in Endymion and other spell counter decks, but also in Sky Striker, and you can potentially use it in some other decks where you're able to fit in Halki Fibrax, Effect Veiler, and where is it? Access Code, because yeah, if you have any monster in any tuner, you can go into a Hulk. Hulk can pull an Effect Veiler from your deck. You can then link those into Selene, and as long as there's 3 spells between you and your opponent's graveyards, you can remove spell counters from Selene to bring back Veiler, and then go into a 5300 access code, excuse me. So that's a really easy way for any tuner and other monster to make an access code talker, and that's part of why Selene is number 35 on the list. But again, also she's of course used in regular spell counter decks as well. So again, this is kind of like the Natis, kind of like you're either gonna build a deck that uses it or not. It's not like a generic staple you would just craft just for the hell of it, but is still useful in multiple decks. Okay, whoops, I think we're on 34, right? Yeah, 34 is going to be Solemn Judgment. So Solemn Judgment is like Strike in that it's a generic counter trap, but tends to be more used in control and or back row heavy decks, as that is kind of tends to be Solemn Judgment's main function nowadays, is to protect back rows from Lightning Storm and Feather Duster, as being just a catch-all, you know, Omni negate. But you know, lest we forget, it can negate any spell or trap or summon. So you know, it's always going to be able to stop something, and you can always pay for it because it costs half your life points and not a fixed amount. I touched on this earlier as well. Solemn Judgment is a card you can always pay for, so it's kind of useful in that regard. It's like Strike in that you can throw this in any deck, but it's probably only really useful in more control-based decks. Alright, next up we have as number 33, Psyframe Gear Omega. This is a generic level 8 Synchro monster that can be used to banish cards from your opponent's hand. Not permanently, they go back, I think during the next standby phase or during the end of the turn. Until, yeah, your next standby phase. But still being able to rip cards from the opponent's hand is pretty good, especially on the first turn. Can potentially stop them from making plays altogether. If your deck can make level 8 synchros, you might want to consider playing Omega. Sword Souls in general being one of the more apt uses for Omega nowadays, but like Rose Tenyi, like I said, any deck that can make a level 8 synchro should probably consider maybe using Psyframe Lord Omega. Alright, next up we have Herald of the Arclight. You might be kind of surprised as number 32. You might be surprised to see this as a bit of a generic card. You might think, well, isn't this mostly just used in Drytron? But it's got generic requirements, and Synchro Summoning level 4 for some decks is not that difficult. Even some like Sword Soul Tenyi decks can do it. Or like Adamantipator can sometimes end up pulling this out as well. And it's a really good monster to go into because, for one, it banishes anything sent from hand or deck to graveyard while it's on board, which can shut down a lot of decks, but it's also just an Omni negate as well by tributing it. So, yeah, if your deck can make level 4, there's a decent chance you should probably be playing Herald of the Arclight. And then, of course, also useful for ritual-based decks like Drytron as well. Alright, next up, number 31, we've got Linkuriboh. Linkuriboh, if you're playing level 1 monsters, you should probably be playing a Linkuriboh in your extra deck. Not always, but usually speaking. Drytron played Linkuriboh quite a bit. I know Altergeist is a deck I played that could potentially use Linkuriboh. I didn't end up crafting it because it's kind of still a bit niche, but I'm actually honestly rather surprised to see Linkuriboh as high up on the list as it is. Because I can't really think of too many. It might just be from leftover Drytron decks. Because yeah, otherwise I can't really think of too many other decks that see a lot of meta play right now that would actually play Linkuriboh. But again, if you've got it and you're playing a decent amount of level 1 monsters, it's probably worth considering throwing this in your extra deck. Okay, number 30 is going to be Borlode Savage Dragon. So this is another generic level 8 synchro, but this one does need to grab a link monster from the graveyard in order to use it. So basically, if you're playing a deck that can make level 8 synchros and also uses links, which to be fair is most decks that can make level 8 synchros, you probably want to be playing a Borlode Savage Dragon. Like Adamantipator is particularly reliant on this card. I think Dragon Link does use this card. And this is a fringe option, as I have... And I think I am currently still using, yeah, at this time I currently still am using Borlode Savage Dragon in my Sword Soul Tenyi extra deck, so potentially useful there as well. But yeah, just being able to have a huge body and also be an Omni Negate is very, very useful. But again, you have to not only be able to make a level 8 synchro, but also have a link monster in your graveyard. So just want to be mindful of that there. Alrighty, number 29 is going to be Foolish Burial. This card is fairly simple. It just lets you send any monster from deck to the graveyard. Is useful in a huge swath of decks, as many decks like to have a specific monster from their deck go to the graveyard. Most notably Trizu, Adamantipator. You could use it in Eldritch variants if you wanted to, like maybe the Zombie World ones. Or I mean just any of them in general, really, if you want to just Foolish Eldritch, but you don't really need to do that. Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's any number of decks I could list off that would love to use. Oh, in the Zombie World variants, that's right. You typically use it for the big guy that comes out if you got Zombie World on the board. The Necro something, I can't remember its name, but yeah, Foolish. I think we're now starting to get into the territory of cards that are like just good to generically craft because they're used in such a large swath of decks. Foolish Burial is definitely a card like that I would consider. So I would consider number 28, Cyframe Gamma, and then also of course Cyframe Gear, or Cyframe Driver, which you need to play in order to use the negate here. But yeah, Cyframe Gear Gamma is another very good generic card that can be used in just a lot of different decks. It's a very, very good going second card because it can negate any monster effect as long as you have no monsters on the board. It can also potentially be used to go into a level 8 synchro if you happen to play it during your turn, potentially like Omega, which, I mean, obviously, you know, the Cyframes you're kind of quote-unquote supposed to go for Omega once you summon them to the board. But Gamma in particular, just being able, again, to negate and destroy being the important part, any monster effect with a relatively easy requirement. Sometimes it could end up being dead, especially if you go first, but... decks that typically play this card, again, this is actually kind of more generically played. So I've seen Trizu play it, I've seen Sword Soul Tenyi play it, I've seen like Virtual World play it. It's again just kind of whether you can fit it or not, more than anything else. Alright, next up we've got kind of a surprising one to probably to most people, but Salamangreat Almirage. I think the reason this card is so high up is mostly because of Trizu, but also I know IDS can use Almirage to potentially send a card to graveyard, to either set up its effect or go into the Purgatrio. Obviously, Salamangreat and Cybersex themselves can use Salamangreat Almirage, but let's be honest, it is mostly Trizu that's keeping this card so high on the list. That number, oh shoot, did I actually change the number? No, yeah, I did. This is 28, right? No, I'm losing track of the number again. We'll figure it out. No, this should be 27, right? I'm pretty sure. Anyone who's actually watching this video is just going to go back and listen and prove me a dummy. I've probably already screwed up the numbering here, but whatever. Anyway, yeah, that's going to be number 27 here. Again, largely because of Trizu, but any deck that wants to get low attack normal summon monsters into the graveyard, which sounds really niche, but kind of isn't at the same time, can consider using Salamangreat Almirage. This is, again, I wouldn't consider this like a generic craft it and then find decks for it staple. This is more of like a craft it for a specific deck and then you can use it in other stuff, kind of a staple. Number 26, however, IP Masquerena is more of like a, you could craft this and then just throw it into decks because this is a very generic card. As long as you're playing pretty much any amount of link monsters, you can find room for, or you might not be able to find room for this card, but you could justify playing this card. It's used by making any two non-link monsters. Basically lets you link summon on your opponent's turn, but the link monster also has the added beneficial effect of not being able to be destroyed by card effects. But more often than not, you're just going to go for like, you know, the Nightmare Unicorn or something with the IP Masquerena there. So, all right, let's see here. Now we're starting to get into more like archetype stuff. Like I'm passing a lot of Sword Soul cards on the list here. Okay, number 25, right here in the middle of the list. is going to be, well, okay, it technically isn't Nightmare Cerberus, but Nightmare Cerberus and Nightmare Phoenix are both, I consider, kind of be the same spot, because they tend to get used. I guess Nightmare Phoenix is used a little bit more frequently, but we'll lump these together and call them slots 24 and 25, because Cerberus and Phoenix are both just really good generic Link 2 monsters. They're both super rares, so they're not hard on your budget there. And the Nightmare Phoenix is capable of discarding a card and getting rid of any spell trap. This card is capable of discarding a card and getting rid of special summon monsters. They do have to be in the main monster zone, so we can't get rid of just anything, but you know, if you're looking for spots just to fill up your extra deck, especially if you're playing a more budget list and you just want some generic Link monsters, I can highly recommend slot 25 against Cerberus, slot 24 Nightmare Phoenix on the list here. Yeah, I can recommend these cards pretty highly. Nightmare Phoenix, not even just a good budget option, but in particular stands out between the two as just being good to play in decks like Adamancipator, like Prank Kids can use it. It is a card that often gets cut. It's a more flexible spot, but it does tend to see more play than Cerberus there, so. Okay, yeah, now I have to scroll up through a lot of Sword Soul cards here. Number 23 is going to be Mecha Phantom Beast Auroradon. So this card is used obviously most often right now in Sword Soul Tenyi, but also Rose Tenyi, and oh shoot, there are other combo decks. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head that use Auroradon, but I mean, we've all probably been Auroradon comboed at some point, right? Auroradon, again, like other cards on this list, not one you can just craft and then toss into any deck, because you have to have like the O-Lion and or the Deskbot and or the Jet Synchron to summon from the deck off the Hulk to then be able to go into the Auroradon. Like, you do have to build your deck very specifically to include an Auroradon line, but that said, the Auroradon line can be used in a decent swath of decks. Like I said, Sword Soul Tenyi, Rose Tenyi, I think Dragon Link? Oh no, maybe not Dragon Link. There's one other deck that I see pretty frequently that uses it that I just can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, like I said, we've all been a Auroradon combo at one point or another. We've all seen it. So, okay, number 22 here is going to be Pot of Prosperity, another one of the Pot of cards that tends to see play in quite a number of decks. This one's a little bit easier on the extra deck. It does still require you to banish 3 or 6, but even if you banish 6, we're still only excavating 1 card from among them. So, yeah, if you're playing a deck that doesn't use the extra deck too much, you can just banish 6 and play Pot of Prosperity that way. But Prosperity is a little bit more flexible in that we can play it in decks like Sky Striker, Pure Sword Soul, Pure Trizu, that don't need all 15 of their extra decks slots. They typically only need more like 10 to 12 throughout the course of an average game. So because they have a little bit more flexibility, they can afford to play Pot of Prosperity for a little bit more filtering. Alrighty, next up, number 21 is going to be Terraforming. Again, this is one of those, like, you build it for a specific deck, but then you can throw it into other decks, and it's very self-explanatory. It searches field spells. If you're playing a field spell that's important to your strategy, you should probably be playing Terraforming. That's about all I got for that one. Alright, number 20 is going to be Lightning Storm. Lightning Storm. Yep, this card is one we've all seen in one form or another. It's when I first saw this, or when I first heard this card was getting printed, because I wasn't playing when I heard this card was getting printed, I was like, what is this game coming to? Isn't this just Raigeki plus Feather Duster in the same card? Doesn't this just get played in everything? It actually doesn't. You actually almost never play 3 copies of it in anything, or even 2. This is typically a one of, because I mean, yes, it is kind of Raigeki or Feather Duster in the same card, but you also have to control no face-up cards to use it. So typically you play this card if you're going second, or if you're, well, yeah, you just play it if you're going second. Numeron is like probably the only major deck that would actually play 3 copies of this card, because they always go second. Sky Striker, even though it is a going second deck, actually typically doesn't play this card, because just we so often have face-up cards when we're playing Sky Striker. And Sky Striker also doesn't pressingly need to wipe a board. It can just kind of pick it off through, or ideally you'll just stop it with your hand traps and stuff. But this is a very generic card. Like, Trizu plays it often. You can play it in Sword Soul Tenyi. You can play it in like just about any deck, whether it's control or combo based. You'll like wiping monsters and or back rows. So. Alright, number 19 is going to be Pot of Desires. This is the most used of the Pot of cards on this list here. because it doesn't banish from the extra deck, it banishes from the main deck. And you might see this and think like 10 cards from the main deck, like, isn't it much easier just banish 3 from the extra for prosperity? And for a lot of decks, no. Like, a lot of decks really need all 15 of their extra deck cards to have the options to be able to go into them at some point in the game. But they don't always need all the cards that are going to be in their decks, so you can just banish 10 to draw 2. Now, you do have to be mindful if you're putting Pot of Desires in your deck of the ratioing of your deck. You typically only want to play Desires in decks that play mostly 2 or 3 ofs, because sometimes you'll end up banishing all copies of a card you need for a combo, and that really sucks. It can even happen if you're playing 3 copies of the card, but that's more RNG at that point. But RNG is still manageable to a degree, so we do have to be mindful of that when we're including Desires in our deck. So, now on to number 18, which is going to be, where is she? Appaloosa Bow of the Goddess. This is another, now we're starting to get into like, these are like true staples. Like, you could just craft these and slot them into a lot of different decks. Appaloosa Bow of the Goddess. We've all run into this card at some point or another. Being able to make multiple negates is really, really good. This does typically need to come down, you know, as part of a dedicated combo though, so you do still have to be mindful of the decks you're putting it in. That said, this is again a fairly generic requirement. It's just monsters with different names and a good result at the end. Most decks you'll see this most often in are like Trizoo, Adamancipator, Phantom Knights, and probably another major one I'm not remembering off the top of my head. I'm getting a little loopy. I've been up for quite a while, and I'm as I'm coming to the end of this video here. So, all right. Number 17 is going to be Nightmare Unicorn, which I touched on earlier, along with the other Nightmare cards. But Nightmare Unicorn does tend to see more play, as it's a good generic Link 3 option. It's just about the only good really generic Link 3 option. It's an Ultra, so it's not as budget as the other Nightmare cards, but if you've got it and or you can craft it and you're just looking for extra cards to throw in your extra deck, Nightmare Unicorn is definitely not a bad one. And like I mentioned earlier, it's really good to use with IP Masquerade as well. Using IP Masquerade plus any monster to go into Nightmare Unicorn on your opponent's turn, and then you can use the effect to disrupt during, well, yeah, again, during your opponent's turn. Adamancipator is the deck I'm most familiar with that plays Nightmare Unicorn. Sky Striker can play it, but typically it doesn't have room for it nowadays. But again, it's just a generic card. You can play it in a lot of extra decks. Okay, number 16 is Baron de Fleur. This one's, as the list goes on here, these ones are gonna kind of get more self-explanatory, because it's either gonna be like Baron here, where it's like, can you make this card? All right, you should probably be playing it. Or it's like, this card goes in just about any deck. It depends if you have room for it. So Baron falls under the former category of, if you can make level 10 synchros, you should be playing a Baron de Fleur, because having a generic Omni Negate that can also potentially bring back combo pieces during the next turn, and can blow stuff up, and has 3,000 attack is really, really, really good. Go figure. Alright, next up, number 15 we've got is Effect Veiler. And I know this one has definitely moved up on the list since the last time I did a staple guide. Veiler is seeing a lot more play now, as Sword Soul Tendy gets more popular, and negating on-board monster effects becomes better and better in this meta. Veiler can also be used, like I mentioned, as part of the like Selene combo to potentially go into access code. Veiler being a tuner, just very useful in general. Not only for that Selene combo, but also in like Sword Soul Tendy, just for going into Hulk, or for making a synchro play sometimes. You'll special Tendy in normal Veiler and just go for level 8 synchro. So, but even if you're not playing synchro-based stuff, or you're not using it for a combo, Veiler is still just generically useful as a hand trap to negate monster effects. Alright, number 14 is going to be, where is it, Harpy's Feather Duster. Another very self-explanatory card. Are you interested in blowing up your opponent's back rows? Play Harpy's Feather Duster. That's going to be more often than not for combo decks, but in most combo-based decks, it's good to have it for going second if you can fit it in. Alright, number 13 here is going to be Divine Arsenal Oz Zeus Sky Thunder. This is another kind of self-explanatory one. If you're playing Xyz monsters, you should probably be playing Zeus, because Zeus can be stacked on top of any Xyz monster and then provides a quick effect, potential multiple board wipes, depending on how many materials you have, and the board wipes don't even destroy, they send. So again, if you're playing any decent amount of Xyz monsters, you should probably just be playing Zeus, in my opinion. Okay, number 12 is going to be Crystron Halki Fibrax, which has been a part of a lot of combos that we've mentioned, like the Selene one. like the Auroradon combos. Because it can be used in multiple different very good combo lines, it's no surprise that Halki Fibrax is just very generically useful. Now that said, even though this is pretty high on the list, this is actually one of those, like, don't craft it and then look for decks for it. Make a deck that specifically uses it, and then now it's easier to make other decks that use Halki Fibrax, is how I would look at it. But yeah, more often than not, you're going to be grabbing, I touched on these tuners earlier, O-Lion, Jet Synchron, or Deskbot 001 are typically the tuners you grab if you're going for like the Auroradon line. But depending on the deck you're playing, it can sometimes be useful to grab one of your Archetypes tuners. Not often, but it can come up. Okay, number 11 here is going to be everyone's favorite Destroyer, Phoenix Enforcer. You might have expected to see this a little bit higher on the list, but I mean, being the 11th most used, well, generic anyway, card in Master Duel is still a pretty big feat. And actually, looking at the rest of the list here, yeah, it is actually just slot number 11. Wait, did I miss a card? Hang on. I'm just counting here. No, there should be only other... Uh-oh, I think I missed a card. Either I didn't count it or I forgot it. Hang on, let me look here, because there should only be 10 more cards after this. No, there should only be 9 more cards after this. Or 9 more, yeah. So this should be card number 10. Did I miss one of these? I don't think I did. I must have just not counted on like my counter that I'm using here. That must just be what it is. One of the cards I rattled off. So oh well. Yeah, Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer is going to be, we'll just call it number 10 because I just lost. I told you though I was going to lose count at some point there, but whatever. Anyway, DPE is going to be number 10. So yep, this card is used in. I mean, if you've got the 2 extra deck slots for Vert Anaconda plus DPE. As well as the main decks, the 4 main deck slots for your 2 Fusion Destinies and 2 Destiny Heroes, you should probably be playing DPE. Not always, because not all decks can fit it, but if you can fit it, you should probably include it. It's just a free, really good generic boss monster. And number 9, also tangentially related, is Vert Anaconda. Now, I know I said I wasn't going to be including multiple cards from the same engine in all these lists, but Vert Anaconda is actually noteworthy of mentioning outside of DPE, because it is used outside of DPE. It was included in the last staple guide I did as well, before DPE even came out. Most fusion-based decks, well, I almost said that really weirdly. Basically, if you're playing a fusion or polymerization spell, you're probably playing Vert Anaconda, because the requirements to make it are really generic to affect monsters, and it's really good for turboing out your synchros. Again, nowadays, it's more often than not just used for DPE, but can still be used in like Prank Kids or like Heroes or just any fusion-based deck, like I said. Alright, number 8 is going to be our trusty Crossout Designator, which I know this card has also definitely been moving up in these slots in the last month or so, as Sword Soul Tinny has kind of brought us into a Crossout Designator format. I think most combo-based decks should probably be playing 2 Crossouts if they have the room for it. And I think if you don't have the room for it, you should definitely be considering making the room for it. You can always, definitely for sure, but this card, at its worst, just tends to act as multiple copies of, or more copies of Called by the Grave. For obviously you have to be playing the hand traps in your deck as well, but basically you can think of these as counters for like the next 6 of the next 7 cards we're going to be talking about here. Let's see, speaking of 6, actually we'll move into the last extra deck staple here, which is Access Code Talker. Yes, this is the card of all extra deck cards that sees the most play in Master Duel, and isn't really any surprise. It's very generic. It's able to destroy cards and not be responded to. Can't respond to the summon either. And it's got huge stats, often coming out with like at minimum 4,300, if not 5,300 attack points. Sometimes more if you're able to throw in a Lake 4 there, but that doesn't always happen. Doesn't often happen, but yeah, 43/5,300 body with really generic requirements and able to blow up your opponent's board and they can't even respond to it. Is it any really wonder that Access Code is the most played extra deck card? Alright, and now we're on to the top 5 here. These 5, you've seen all these cards. They need no introduction. Number 5, most used card in Master Duel, Nibiru the Primal Being. Very good hand trap to play. I think pretty much, not every deck, but I think the vast majority of decks should be playing a copy. especially if you're playing 3 Max C. If you're playing 3 Max C, I think you should almost always be playing 1 Nibiru as well, because I've said this a million times, but I'll say it again. If your opponent is going off and they have a lot of... and they're going to take your Max C challenge, basically, you need to be able to punish them for it. And also, you know, not lose the game. And Nibiru is the easiest way to do that. Number 4 is going to be Infinite Impermanence. You know, this card is very, very good. It's like a better Veiler because it can only be used from hand. You have to have no cards or face-up cards in the field. Right? It's face-up, right? No, it's no cards, yeah. You have to have no cards in the field to use it as a hand trap, but, you know, going second is when we most often want to use it as a hand trap anyway, and it also doesn't matter after going second, as then after that you can just set it face down and actually use it as a trap, and then it has the added ability to lock up an opponent's spell trap zone, and you can sometimes even seal games that way if your opponent's not playing carefully enough. I have said this before, but I always like to set Imperm in the middle spell trap zone, because some people just default to playing their spell traps in the middle. Enough people that I think it's the best place to set Imperm, so that's where I usually put it. And then the top 3, we already all know what they're going to be. Number 3, Called by the Grave. This is more often than not used as hand trap insurance, but it can also just be used to stop any effect that activates in the graveyard. Very, very, very useful card. If you're playing a deck that gets hurt by hand traps in any capacity, you should be playing 2 Called by the Grave. Second most used card in Master Duel is going to be Max C. I think pretty much every deck in Master Duel should be playing at least 2 Max C, if not a full playset. And I mean just about every deck, like probably literally 90 to 95% of decks should be playing 2 or 3 Max C. Not only just to, it's not just used for getting a lot of draws. It's more often than that actually just used as like stopping your opponent. It's kind of like discard this card, your opponent ends their turn. That is often how it ends up playing out. It's just a very, very powerful hand trap that a lot of people have very decisive opinions about. I actually like Max C. I really do. I like playing in a format where it's at 3, or just around in general. It's one of the reasons it's not one of the reasons. It's a very, very minor contributing factor, but I personally just tend not to like formats without Max C as much. I think Max C is good for keeping things in check. Obviously, you can build a ban list around not having Max C and it be, you know, as good, if not, you know, better than a ban list with Max C. But what can I say? I personally just like having Max C around. And then we all know her. We've all seen her forehead. The number 1 most used card in Master Duel is, of course, Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, because pretty much every single deck out there is adding a card from deck to hand, especially sending a card from the deck, or sending a card from deck to the graveyard. Yeah, don't know what else to say about Ash. You just get a playset if you haven't already. If you haven't already, you've hopefully only just started playing Master Duel. Because Ash, C, and then probably also Call by an Imperm should just be some of the first ultra rares that you craft, as those 11 cards, like 3 Ash, 3 C, you don't necessarily need 3 Imperm. You could start with 2. Those 10 cards, 3 Ash Blossom, 3 Max C, 2 Imperm, 2 Call by, that will make up a quarter of like pretty much every single deck you play in Master Duel. Again, not actually every single deck, but pretty much every single one. So that is it. That is the top 50 most used staple cards in Master Duel. And now I get to minimize this other window and look at my timer. And okay, hey, we're actually not as far along as I thought we'd be. So, yeah, thank you everybody for watching, especially if you watched to the end of this one. I very much appreciate that. Yeah, like I said, I'm always looking for new ways to kind of like reintroduce old like video ideas I've done before. So, like I said, I just wanted to do this staple guide a little bit differently than ones I've done in the past. So, if you liked this format, let me know in the comments if you want to see other formats for not only staple guides but other series I have. If you've got ideas, do let me know. I love hearing from you guys in the comments. You're always offering great feedback and criticism. Constructive criticism, constructive being the operative word in that phrase. But you guys are really good about that. A lot better than a lot of other YouTube comment sections I see. So I love you guys. And then also subscribing not only really helps me out, but is the best way to stay up to date on when my videos come out, which they do come out every single day. I've got a new Master Duel video for you guys. So, alright, I think that's going to about do it for this one. Without further ado, this is XLex signing out. Hope you guys have a fantastic day.